You're listening to the MindPod Network. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Yoga of Strength, a hero's journey into the heart of reality. It's a new book by Andrew Mark Rowe, and it's available April 19th wherever books are sold. It's all happening. 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 It's all Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast, episode 134 of the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast. That's me. I am your host. So happy to be back with you guys here on the audio waves of cyberspace. That's where podcasts live, right? On this episode of the podcast, we have Father Greg Boyle. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries, which is the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry program in the world. Now, I've been trying to get this interview for a long time, basically since the podcast even began. And I'll tell you more about Father Greg in just a bit. But especially if you live in Los Angeles, you know what Homeboy Industries is. It has left an indelible mark on our fine city here and has completely reinvented the way the community interacts with gang members who are looking to get out, who are looking to change their lives and seek healing and seek, a place, a meaningful place within our community. And Father Greg Boyle is the architect of Homeboy Industries. And it's just truly, truly a fantastic and inspiring institution here in Los Angeles. So yes, Father Greg Boyle on the show. Very, very cool. So I just wanted to mention one thing before we get into other eclectic mind-opening topics. That, of course, I'm sure if you listen to this podcast, you're aware of the MAPS podcast as well. It's the other podcast that I host. I'm not even going to edit that out. Fuck it. That I host. It is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they were kind enough to bring me on as their host for the podcast. And yes, it is singular in focus. It deals exclusively with the modern renaissance of psychedelic research and psychedelic sciences and all the amazing visionaries and characters who are in that world. That podcast has been such a fulfilling adventure to go on, to be a part of, and it is really taking off. It's, I guess I could say it's more popular than this one. Go figure. But if you haven't listened to it, and even if you think you aren't into psychedelics as a method, as whatever, as a spiritual path, as an area of research, give it a chance. It's very, very eye-opening, and the people who are on that podcast are really doing important work. So just wanted to give a big shout out to the MAPS podcast. I also wanted to take a moment to give a shout out to a couple events coming up that I am honored to be a part of. The first one is Wellbeing in the Modern Age, WITMA for short, which is taking place on April 20th, 420 in downtown Los Angeles at the Hudson Lofts. And I am part of a panel entitled Integrating the Psychedelic Experience, moderated by Michael Phillip. And I'm on the panel along with Trisha Eastman, Ramin Nazir, and a couple other great people. Should be very, very cool. The great Michael Beckwith is also part of this get-together. And if you're in Los Angeles on 420, definitely check that out. And on June 1st, In lovely Santa Barbara, California, there is a 4-hour workshop that I am doing, co-facilitating with Trisha Eastman once again. And it is put on by the entheomedicine folks who do regular workshops in Santa Barbara, kind of day-long seminars. And this one is entitled Psychedelics and Entheogens, Preparation, Integration, and Transformation. And it takes place Saturday, June 1st at the Unity of Santa Barbara Church. And it's going to be great. I do part 1 of the day and Trisha does part 2. My part is entitled Preparing the Journey, and we're going to go into in depth into really identifying the main plant medicines and entheogens and the unique ways they can each heal emotional trauma and aid in spiritual growth, and talk about the do's and the don'ts and ideal setting parameters and ideal ceremonial settings, possibly identify pharmaceuticals and supplements and foods that could that you should take or avoid prior to your journey to make it the most amazing thing possible. So that's happening on June 1st. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Yoga of Strength, a fable, book 1 of the Yoga trilogy by Andrew Mark Rowe. It's a hero's journey into the heart of reality. The Yoga of Strength is the story of Andrew Cardiff, a longtime squire on the cusp of elevation to knighthood within the Yellow Order of the Kingdom of Tharain. There is only one issue. He is an abject coward enslaved to his baser instincts. Thrust into a world of magic and treachery, Andrew tumbles along a path that threatens devastation at every turn. This unlikely hero must plumb the depths of his soul in search of courage and strength that have always eluded him. Around him, the world is crumbling. Will Andrew discover his answers at the center of the mystery before it's too late? Well, there's only one way to find that out, right? You've got to read the book. And I've read it, and Andrew Mark Rowe does a fantastic job, really a brilliant job of crafting this world that is part Game of Thrones, part Bhagavad Gita, and takes you into, a quest for enlightenment while also using yogic philosophy and dragons and Greek and Hindu and Roman and Celtic mythological symbols and deities to weave the plot together to expose its teachings and also, the moral compass that lies within our protagonist. So the Yoga of Strength is available April 19th, wherever books are sold. Pick up your copy, you can pre-order it. You'll be glad you did. The Yoga of Strength. All right, let's get into it with Father Greg Boyle. And as I said at the beginning of the podcast, he is the founder and guiding light and inspiration behind Homeboy Industries. And when I told people, my friends, that I interviewed him for the podcast and mentioned Homeboy Industries, most people were like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. I've seen that somewhere, And right, so there's a lot of businesses sort of around Southern California and Los Angeles with the Homeboy Industries kind of brand and logo on it. Airports all around the city, bakeries, and all sorts of very, very cool things. And they're all run, facilitated, and staffed by former gang members who have come into Homeboy Industries looking for a new way of life. So this interview is shorter than most. It's just a little bit over 30 minutes. And it's kind of a funny thing. There were a lot of distractions during the interview. But I have to say that in this case, it was like a really positive experience having those distractions go on while the podcast was happening. Father Greg is still very, very involved after 30 years directly, interpersonally with the people at Homeboy Industries. So people were coming into the office and, very, very proud, showing them showing him like how great their life has become and asking for advice and giving them high fives and fist bumps while we're doing this interview. So it was kind of, there was some chaos around, but it was, really loving and inspiring for me to witness in person. So I hope you enjoy the interview. Father Greg Boyle. Father Greg Boyle, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this.
Great to be with you.
It's a pleasure. I've been following your work for quite a while. But where I wanted to start, and all my listeners they're all around the globe. They're certainly not Angelinos like myself, but I am an Angelino. I'm born and raised here. And when you came onto the scene and really started making an impact, it was very noticeable. So tell me a little bit about what it is that you saw around LA at the time when you started Homeboy Industries that drove you to start it. What was happening?
Well, it was very particular in as much as I was pastor of Dolores Mission Parish, so it was the poorest parish in the city, so that was my geography.
Okay.
And so we had 8 gangs in these, in the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. So
wow.
I started burying kids in 1988, and so that's sort of how it worked. I never said, I think I'd like to work with gang members. It never went like that. It was, I'm pastor, and this happens, and my options are what? Bury my head in the sand,
right,
or roll up my sleeves. So as a community, we rolled up our sleeves to kind of deal with this issue.
And when you say deal with issues, so where did it start? What was the first thing that you wanted to deal with?
Well, the first thing was it was kind of simultaneous to the bearing of this very first kid.
Okay.
Was the fact that there were all these junior high, middle school age gang members who their local school had given them the boot, so no one would take them. And so they were wreaking havoc in the projects, violent and selling drugs and writing on walls and all during the day,
Yeah.
So I walked out to them and said, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And then they said yes. They all said yes. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them, so it kind of forced my hand. So I kindly asked the nuns if they wouldn't mind vacating the convent. And we turned the convent into a school for gang members. That was the first thing we did.
So you said something interesting. None of the schools would take them, so they went into that world of gang life, right? So you've been doing this a long time now. What is it that draws somebody into that life? Is it circumstantial, geographic? Is it a lineage? Is it economic? Is it just the way our system's a little racist and classist? What is it that gets them into that life?
Well, I don't think gang life draws. I don't think it lures. I don't think it attracts. Kids are pushed into gangs because of no hopeful kid has ever joined a gang. So
I see.
So no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. That's the overlay that we often put on it, The outsider view kind of looks at it and says, oh, I see what it is. Kids want excitement, or kids want to belong, or, they make these assumptions.
My assumption was, and I mean, from my limited exposure, product of LA Public Schools as well, but is that it seems like there's no choice. I don't think there is no choice, but it seems like there's no choice. So then
Well, I wouldn't say there's no choice, because obviously in the projects there were kids who came from almost identical situations who didn't join gangs. So, but I would say that not all choices are created equal.
Okay.
So that's different than saying there is no choice.
I see.
And loving, caring adult who pays attention and shows up in the kid's life seems to be the one thread that will actually keep a kid all things being equal, are equal with the other kids, like
sure.
single mom or
Yeah.
poverty or whatever it is. How do you explain that kid got into a gang and that kid didn't? And the difference would be, basically that the kid who didn't join a gang had a mom who would chase his ass, would, hey, get home now.
Right.
And then as opposed to the mom who didn't. And the mom who didn't could well be somebody who's holding down 3 jobs, so that's tough.
So, in some ways, you're filling that role. You're acting as the loving adult who can give them love and attention, guidance.
Well, I think we all are around here. That's kind of that's what we're about here.
Yeah, so tell me more about that. What's Homeboy Industries about?
Well, it's about tenderness and creating a community of tenderness so that together we can create a community of kinship where there is no us and them. So, so I think it's just a place where we can give them rest and respite from their chronic toxic stress. And then
Beautiful.
then they become the sanctuary that they sought here. And then they go home and provide that sanctuary to their kids, and suddenly you've broken a cycle.
They, like the Gandhi quote, they can be the change, right? Yeah, so breaking the cycle. And, again, being an Angelino and what you said about the us and them thing and breaking the cycle, Los Angeles is a complicated city, I find. And the older I get, nothing changes. I still find it to be a complicated city. It's subtly segregated. We don't say it's segregated because the laws don't reflect it as formally as they used to, say, in like the deep Jim Crow South or something. But the lines around LA are very, it's quietly segregated. And because of that, I think it creates this mentality around people who grow up in LA of not really understanding the reality of the situation. I'm a white kid from the West Side. I didn't understand the magnitude of the situation until I was 16. You know what I mean? So, does that play a part of it? Like the actual neighborhoods, like where people are from, or, I don't know, does that factor into it?
Well, I think things have changed,
Yeah.
I grew up here. I remember the Watts riots. I was selling newspapers on a corner on Beverly and Vermont.
Yeah.
And I could see the flames down in Watts, but those riots were down there.
Right.
And then cut to 1992 after the Rodney King verdict.
Yeah.
And finally a place where the unrest wasn't happening. Well, it was happening all over the city.
Right. And I do see it's changed considerably for the better. Florence and Normandy is not the Florence and Normandy of 1992,
and then,
right?
When I was a kid growing up here, there was just no way that come to the east side for anything.
Right.
And that's not true now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known where Boyle Heights was, and it was part of my name. I just didn't even know anything about it.
Right. Yeah, likewise.
But today, people can still, from the west side, talk about restaurants on the east side.
I love that.
So that's different. That actually is a sign of hope,
Absolutely. Yeah, so speaking of hope, so when a kid comes into Homeboy Industries, well, first tell me a little bit of, when I say they come into Homeboy Industries, tell me more about, like, where does the process start? What do they come here to do? I know it started with a tattoo removal service, right? But then you expanded and grew. So they come here, and what are their options?
Well, tattoo removal is just one of the services we offer, and so they come in, they drug test, and then a week later they come for an orientation if they tested clean, and then they come for an interview, and if they accept them, and then they start in our 18-month training program, which is a paid gig. So that's kind of the centerpiece of the whole program now.
And the training program, you give them a job and you give them, right?
Well, we pay them to work on themselves. So they do therapy, they go to classes, they attend the group things. Then
I love that. Pay them to work on themselves.
Yeah. And then, we have the 9 social enterprises, so we'll be involved in those at one time or another in the 18 months. Then some people stay on as what we call core workers, and then.
So,
But the whole premise here is healing. It's all about healing. So we're not that, because an employed gang member or a returning citizen may or may not return to prison, and an educated one may or may not. But our promise is that a healed gang member won't ever go back, ever.
So healing. I want to explore that a little bit more because it's a beautiful phrase and it's subjective, can mean different things to different people. Healing the heart, healing trauma, healing. I don't know. The trauma from the life that they led on the streets. What's the common thread that they're healing here?
Well, the notion around here is if you don't transform your pain, you're just going to keep transmitting it.
Hurt people.
Yeah. So you want to kind of interrupt that, and. But it begins really with, kind of saying, you're going to find rest here from the chronic toxic stress that you carry like a backpack. We're going to enable you to take that backpack off so that you can have access to your own healing, So the healing happens in this culture of tenderness and care and... It is, and it's the problem is people cut to the chase. That it's for a lot of programs, it's about content. Okay. They just need training. They just need better education. They need a better moral compass. We need to build their character.
Right.
So you cut to training, and you bypass the most essential piece, which is rest from their chronic toxic stress. That's the essential piece. Because you're not going to be able to really deliver services unless you handle that. And then once they have respite from it, you can they can trust the place and they can trust the culture and the community. Then you deliver services,
One comes before the other.
Yeah, but it's kind of, it's a step we miss, like with homeless and stuff.
Right.
Get your act together and we'll get you a place to live.
Right.
But, they'll never get their act together unless somebody can give them respite from what they have to carry. And the same with gang members. And so it's the difference between content and context. So a lot of programs just begin with content and stay with content. Here are the services we deliver. Here's our menu. And we have the same menu. But our secret sauce is we begin with that one piece, that says, well, we invite you to surrender to doing this particular work on yourself, to do your own work. And this will enable you to really receive these services and to move beyond this place after 18 months. To move beyond knowing that now you're resilient. And now the world will throw at you what it will, but this time you will not be toppled by it like you were the last time.
Right. So you're injecting this atmosphere of love, compassion, and just humanity. It's, in many of the political conversations that you see out there, there seems to be this degree of humanity that's missing. It's like not treating, gang members who have fallen into this life or pushed in, however you want to say it. It's like incarceration, push them aside. You're not really embracing their humanity and giving them that safe space, right? So that toxic stress backpack that you're talking about, what are the signs of that? Like, what's that look like for someone?
Well, if you go to the ACE study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and there's a checklist of 10 things,
Okay.
You were raised by an alcoholic mother, by a mentally ill father, sexual abuse, violence, neglect. There's a whole list of 10 things. Everybody who walks through these doors can check off 9 or 10 of that list.
Wow.
By contrast, I can't check off a single thing.
Wow.
I don't have one on that list. And so that doesn't make me morally superior to them. That's quite the opposite. I stand in awe at what they've had to carry rather than in judgment at how they carry it.
Right.
So, but that's the key thing. If you can identify those things, then you can know where to pay attention and how to do the work with folks who have suffered greatly and are hugely traumatized and damaged.
Yeah, right. Where does drug addiction factor in?
I think it mainly factors in is if you're not doing the work and you're not dealing with your trauma, then you're more likely to self-medicate. Well, so mainly what people do is they self-medicate. I mean, that's why they use drugs,
Yeah, and I mean, the reason I asked that, I'm a recovering person, and early on in my recovery in the late 90s, I went to the county jail down the street and everything, and the thing that I noticed is everyone, well, not everyone, but the majority of people were in there for drugs in some way or for another. If it wasn't possession, then it was petty theft to get the drugs, armed robbery to control the corners where you could sell the drugs, or some form or another. And even like the gang members, like, it was such a huge part of the culture if it wasn't self-medicating economically. And I'm just wondering how...
Well, it is part of the culture, and it isn't. I mean, in my 33 years of working with gang members, there was kind of a wholesale rejection of the gang member who got high. He was weak.
Okay.
He would look for beef with guys we don't have beef with.
Right.
He'd be his own best customer, so he'll be what he's supposed to be selling, he's consuming.
Right.
So
no, but I mean even the selling, right?
Yeah, so then you'd get gang members who'd be high on smoking crack, begging me, please don't tell my homies that I'm getting high, because they will quite discipline him. So that was a kind of a different thing. Now it's nobody seems to care if people are meth addicts.
Right. So, this, I mean, hearing you say this thing, I mean, say all of this, to me, it sounds like this is, especially a man of faith like yourself who ran a parish, I mean, literally doing the Lord's work and taking faith out of it for a second. It just seems like, well, this is the logical thing to do, right? I mean, especially within our inner cities, throughout America, not just LA. I mean, this seems like, well, like this is the logical thing to do. Why aren't we doing more of it? I mean,
I don't know. I think there's kind of a, again, I think people embrace the same menu of services, but they don't, the outsider view decides the inside of our policy and what we do. So
that's interesting.
So they're always, the outsiders are kind of saying, why do kids join gangs? They go, oh, I know why. Put this down. Excitement,
Right.
So, that wouldn't appear on my 200 list of why a kid joins a gang, but some police department in this country had that on a brochure. The number one reason why kids join gangs. Excitement. But that's a classic outsider view.
Right.
You know.
So how do we get the outsiders to have a glimpse of the inside?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Well, I think they should be a little bit more reliant on, people who have real access to this issue. So law enforcement has contact with the issue, but they don't have access to it, and we're reliant on people who it's a kind of a shallow connection.
Yeah.
It's the gang expert who takes the stand, who says, I've had 300 contacts with gang members on the street. You go, wow, they're perfect. That's a good word to use, contact. Doesn't mean you have access to anybody.
Right.
But, they filled out these field information cards, and that's it. I've seen that, where they go, this is the gang expert. And I go, yeah, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah.
Do you have...
So they have contact, but they don't have access, where they don't know, kind of how they operate. So they're reliant on the promulgation of old, tired up notions. And you hear this all the time. You'll go, well, gangs are like this, and they think this way, and they always do this, but it's completely bogus, and it's completely, manufactured, and it's from kind of a mythic sense that gets passed on from generation to generation. People presume it's right. Things like, kids join gangs because they want to belong. People always say that one.
Right.
Now, again, that wouldn't even appear on my list, belonging. But again, that's the outsider view, how people, sense that. They you join a little league because you want to belong.
Yeah.
But you join a gang because you would like very much to die, So, and that's the part. And then people will say, well, I talked to gang members, and they said that's why they wanted to join a gang, because they wanted to belong. And I said, yeah, well, and you believe them? And that's part of the issue. So around here, the hope in working on yourself is that you won't stay a stranger to yourself.
So if you take, well, let me ask you this first. Do you guys do outreach to target people who are still sadly in the throes of gang, or do you let them come to you?
They have to come to us. So like a rehab, they have to walk through the door.
There has to be some willingness at first.
Yeah, otherwise the rehabs don't work. So if we were an alcohol rehab center, we wouldn't send people out to bars and sidle up to somebody at the bar and say, I couldn't help notice that was your 9th beer.
Right.
So we would agree that would be an absurd notion.
Right.
And it's parallel. It's equally absurd, because then we think it's about convincing people to do good and avoid evil. It's crazy.
It's not about good or evil.
And no,
not
never.
At all. Right.
It's never been about a moral issue. It's about their violence, and their gang activity is a indicator. It's a symptom. It points beyond itself to all sorts of other things that need to get addressed.
Well, let's talk about those things that need to be addressed that go outside of the individual. Those symptoms that need to, be addressed within, I don't know, economic opportunities or community opportunities. Or do you think about that? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I mean, there are things you need to do at a communal level, societal level. You need to, bridge the disparity between the haves and the have-nots in terms of access to those things.
I guess that's what I'm asking.
Enhance our lives.
Yeah.
But it's mainly about healing. It's mainly about people coming to terms with what was done to them and with what they've done. But that's the only way to get folks to a place of, relational wholeness, which is what you want. Because in the end, you don't, there's going to be tons of monkey wrenches thrown. And you don't want people to unravel when that happens. And that's why it's a total guarantee from our perspective that if they surrender to their own healing, they will heal. Sometimes what happens is It's a little bit like 12-step programs or AA.
Sure.
And they go, does it work? And what do they say at the end of every meeting?
If you work it.
It works if you work it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a 100% guarantee. I always say that to homies here. It's 100% successful for anybody who works it.
Right. The line goes, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path.
Yeah.
If you follow our path, it'll work.
If you surrender to it, if you surrender to your own healing, how can that not work?
Sure.
It's the same principle of recovery.
I see. So relational wholeness, I haven't quite heard. I don't think I've heard that expression in this context. What's that mean in this context? Relational.
Well, that's kind of what healing looks like, and it's all relational. That's
relationship to yourself, to others,
to yourself,
God.
and to others. And can you somehow, be linked to people? Can you find connection? Can you be affectionate, and can you receive people? Can you allow yourself to be reached by people? So it's all about health. And then also uncovering the things that impede you along the way, things that keep you from health. I mean, health is kind of a broad thing, but it's what everything's about.
Yeah.
So there was a university that I attended, and they started a course on hate. That was the name of the course, hate. To address, hate crimes and racism and white supremacy and whatever it is.
Right.
But then I think, wow, is that what we think this is about? You think it's about hate? You'd be better off if you named the title of your course health instead of hate. Because it's about, if you and I have known a racist, let's say we do, or a white supremacist or an anti-Semite, we don't know a person who's one of those three things who is healthy.
Right.
In fact, hate and anti-Semitism and racism are all signs of unhealth.
Right.
But the minute it's about hate, then it means I am not that guy. And that guy doesn't belong to me. And so what you want to do is to somehow get to a place where you say, no, we belong to each other. And separation is an illusion. So how do we bridge that distance that exists between us and somehow get to a place where we can say, somebody goes into a synagogue and shoots the place up. This is a deeply and profoundly ill person.
Right.
I don't need to be a psychiatrist to say that, for God's sake.
Sure.
And how do I know that to be the case? They went into a synagogue and killed a bunch of people.
And nobody healthy does that.
Nobody healthy has ever done that.
Right.
And so once you know...
Or would want to do that.
Well, again, it's it's not about good or evil, but the minute we do that, it's absolutely, we're anchored in untruth when we demonize. And so, and law enforcement looks at stuff like that, and they love the rational. So they'll say, and they absolutely were mortified that they weren't able to come up with a motive for the guy who shot through the windows in the Vegas hotel at the concert down below, because we spent a year on it now. We just can't come up with a motive. And I go, wow, I knew the motive the second it happened. This is a profoundly, deeply anguished, tormented, mentally ill soul. Do I know that for a fact? Well, of course. What else do you need? What do you want to say? His lady left him. What are you looking for? And that's enough. But because unless it's about rational decisions, and where we can land on the motive, it's a fool's errand, and we don't get very far in helping people. So then we can say, how would we have helped that guy reach wholeness and health?
So let's talk about, hearing you say all this and made me think of the other side of thinking of say the police departments. Let's take the police department, for instance. I mean, they're just a good example, is what you're teaching here, or your perspective and what you're instilling within this individual, this, relationship wholeness and relational wholeness and everything. Is it catching on within law enforcement? Do you think, are they starting to understand this a little bit differently?
I think so. The enlightened law enforcement people will say, when they send patrol cars out, know that you're going to encounter people on the worst day of their life. So they're sending out these signals that say, oh, okay, this isn't about good guys and bad guys. So that's helpful. And we went from Daryl Gates,
problematic,
round 'em up, Operation Hammer,
right,
to community policing, which just meant you're the community, tell us what you know about who committed that crime. It was kind of a one-way street. To where we are now, which is quite a good place, which is relational policing, which is what was embraced by Charlie Beck and subsequently by Michael Moore, so in LA. So that's good. That's healthy. You never would have been caught dead talking like that.
25 years,
30 years ago.
Of course, yeah.
Now, having said that, how do you translate that kind of really good, noble notion?
Yeah.
And even protect and serve, which is as good a motto as we've ever seen, to the rank and file.
Yeah, how do you translate that to policy?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think they do it to policy, but it's you have to do more than trickle down, because then you have the rank and file who still think the job is get the bad guy, who still think there are bad guys.
Right. Instead of sick guys.
Yeah.
Instead of wounded guys.
Imagine.
Right.
So you had it was somewhere near Dallas, or it was in Texas, I can't remember where, and it was a school shooting. And on the day of the shooting, and people were killed, this was just within the last year. We've had so many, I can't remember the exact name of the place. But Senator Ted Cruz said, today, evil has visited this town in Texas. And then this was on NPR, cut to a 16-year-old girl who was there when it happened and who knew the shooter. And she said simply, sometimes people carry a world of pain inside here, And so I ask you, who has the more sophisticated analysis of what happened in that school that day, the senator or the 16-year-old girl? And so sometimes we're just lazy. We just go to the evil place, the one that says, this is evil and they're not us.
Right.
Or you can go to a 16-year-old girl's take, which says, there's a world of pain that people have to carry, and this is what it looks like.
So, for, just say the average citizen listening to this podcast or listening to any of the work or interviews that you do, what's something somebody can do on a daily basis to change? Because so much of it does come from changing your perceptions, changing your preconceived notions of what this problem is about. It's not about good or evil. It's not a morality thing. It's about love and compassion and healing sickness, healing wounded people. What's something somebody could do to make this world a better place and dealing with this problem?
Well, our treatment, nobody's ever met a good treatment plan that was born of a bad diagnosis. That's never happened in the history of the world. So,
okay.
So, you want to keep people close to the healthy diagnosis, and that's kind of an essential thing. But if the choice to people, which it was 30 years ago, was are you tough on crime, or are you soft on crime?
Right.
And people always opted for tough. But then if you offer them this choice, are you smart on crime or are you soft on crime? Or are you smart on crime or are you tough on crime? No one will choose tough if that's your options. They're going to choose smart.
Okay.
So this place has always proposed a sense that this is smart on crime.
So there's like within the corporate world of like a lot of tech companies and stuff are really changing the model of corporate atmospheres, and they say don't work harder, work smarter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
it's not about just working 80 hours a week
Right.
and burning yourself to the grindstone. It's
That's
about
right.
time management,
Yeah.
efficiency, and all those things.
Yeah.
This is the equivalent.
Yeah.
Right.
Kind of. I mean, it's, but it also underscores the fact that demonizing is untruth.
Right.
And so you want to always stay anchored in the truth, which is the opposite of demonizing. Human beings are involved.